Hey there, my name's Anthony, and welcome to Vibe with Velo. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of the most popular NPM packages that's used within Velo. It's the NPM package for sending email over Sendgrid. So I'm going to be walking through basically how to set this up, how to get your API key on Sendgrid, how to set up everything on the back end, because it's important to run this code mostly on the back end because you don't want to leak your API key to anybody else so that nobody else out in the world can send an email using your key. And yeah, just going to step through all of that and kind of explain as I go along how everything works. So the first thing we're going to want to do is actually install the Sendgrid package. I've already gone ahead and written some code that's going to work in a little bit once I get the package installed. So we'll zoom. Actually, no, we won't zoom in just quite yet. Let me head over to the code section. I'm going to go on the left here to NPM. I'm going to click my little plus sign, choose install package from NPM. And then I'm going to click install for the Sendgrid/mail service. So this is Sendgrid's typical library for basically interacting with their API. You could, of course, go about it other ways, but using this library just makes your life a lot simpler. So then if we head over to Sendgrid, what I'll need next now is, in order to make this API work, is I'll need an API key. So I need that before I can do anything. You can see I've already set this up, but let's walk through it. So I'm over here on my Sendgrid dashboard. I've obviously signed up for an account. I'm going to go over to settings, click on API keys, and then I'll click create API key. And I'll set it as restricted access because I only really want to use it to send mail. I don't need it to do anything else. So it's always good practice whenever you're dealing with API keys, if you're allowed to kind of set permissions on that key, try to set permissions as tight as possible. So for example, this API key shouldn't be able to make other API keys, nor should it be used for IP management or marketing or any of the other things here. All we care about is being able to send mail. So I'm going to give it full access to send mail and nothing else. And I'm going to give that API key a name. I'm just going to call it my other key. So that's how you would create one. You can see it on the screen there. Of course, I'm not going to use that one. And actually, I'm going to just go ahead and delete that key because I don't need it. I've already actually set up my API key over here. And so what I would do, though, is I would take that key that I just copied. And remember, once they give it to you, you have to copy it right away. You can't ever see your API key again. That's just a very common thing when it comes to websites that provide services. API keys are meant to be seen once, you store them securely, and then you never shouldn't need to see it again through the web interface of the website. If you forget your API key or it gets deleted or something else happens, you could always delete the old API key and replace it with a new one. It's not a big deal. Anyway, if we come over to developer tools, this little icon over here, and we click on our secrets manager, this is where we're going to go ahead and actually store our secret. You can see over here too, I've actually already stored my API key and I've called it Sendgrid, but if I wanted to store a new one, like the one that I had just done, I could go ahead, copy and paste that in there, and then I could hit save. Of course, like I mentioned before, I don't need that right now because I've already set it up. But that's just how you would do it when you're setting things up yourself. All right. So we did that, and now what we're going to do is a couple things. One, we're going to make sure we're importing our secrets backend so we can access that API key, and we're also going to import sgmail from Sendgrid/mail, and that's going to be useful for actually interacting with the Sendgrid API. So I'll define a function in my backend file, and my backend file, I'm going to call it sendgrid.jsw. The W is important there because within Velo, it's something we call web modules. And what that lets you do is very easily create backend code that can execute on your backend and through a bit of magic be imported in your front end without actually revealing any part of that backend code. So for example, here we have our secrets backend actually going ahead and getting that key that we had called Sendgrid within our secrets manager that I just showed you, that code there is only going to execute on the back end, and that's because it's a .jsw file. This is something that's very unique to Velo, but it also makes it very easy to create these things, because otherwise you would have to kind of create your own little API in order to talk to your front end and back end, and here Velo just packages all that up for you. So we go ahead, we get our API key, and then we set it. And setting it is just normal to how Sendgrid normally does it within their library here. We're going to create a little message that's going to be sent, and then we'll just return the function call htmail.sendmail. And yeah, so basically the status of it can go back to the function calling it within our front end. We won't really worry too much about that, but this is just the typical way that you would do that. So that's that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to handle everything else in the front end. And in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to define a little handler. I've already defined it, but what I would normally do is click on my button here, click on properties and events, and then I would add an on-click handler and call it whatever I want. In this case, it's called send email _ click. Then going to just give a little notification to the user that we're about to do something. Always a good thing to do. And then we're going to go ahead and call our sendmail function that we've imported from our backend. And so as you can see up here, we went and imported it, import curly brackets sendmail from backend /sendgrid.jsw. Again, that extension is important because it does a lot of niceties for us. So then we'll call it, and what'll happen is when the call succeeds, we're going to change our text on the email status to say the email was sent successfully, and if some sort of error happens, then we'll say that an error happened and report the error message back to the user. And so that's basically all the code. So we can go ahead and click publish. And actually, one thing before we go, when you're working on this too, and this applies to all backend and is slightly getting off topic from the Sendgrid library itself, but we do have this feature where you can run functions on the backend yourself. So if you wanted to test out your function before you started working in your front end code, this is particularly useful in cases where you're not sure if that code works yet, and you don't want to then figure out if the error you encountered later when programming is your front end or back end code. You can actually isolate those things. So we'll click run. We'll see the function was called, and it returned a bit of information with the status code and all that useful stuff. And then we'll see in a moment that my API was actually called once the email comes through. And there it is. Okay, so that's sent through the testing interface. But of course, we want to go ahead and do it through our website. So I'll close that, minimize this, click publish. And now I'm going to go ahead and load up the web page where I'll send the email from. So we'll see, okay, send an email with Sendgrid. Click the button below to send an email. Perfect. I'm going to click it. It's going to attempt to send it. And now it says the email was sent successfully. And if we come over here, in just a moment, we'll see the email come through. And there it is. Oh. And yeah, that's basically it. That's how you would use Sendgrid in order to do this. This is actually kind of the same type of workflow you would use for any sort of email service you were using. If you were connecting to their API, either through raw calls using the Wix fetch library or through a library that company provides, that's how you would go ahead and generally do this. Obviously, the commands would differ slightly, but this is the general structure you'd want to follow. So yeah, that's basically it. Thank you for listening along this time, and I hope to see you again at the end of the next episode. All right, bye.